is this
Turn on.
How about now? All right, yeah. Oh, so many thoughts. So this technology, as I said yesterday, is very much an amplifier. So there's it's like, again, the very large waves that you can surf farther, but you also want to surf very carefully because you can drown in them. And drowning could mean just being lost in the noise of too much other content out there. I think that overall, people who are independent, entrepreneurial, and multidisciplinary will benefit from this technology, and the people who want to be specialists, who are maybe working for larger companies, are going to overall find it harder. That's just my initial instinct, is that because this technology can let you go from being just a novice at something to being pretty competent at it, you can basically be like for example, if you're an indie game creator, that's a great example of, you can maybe get the right, you can do the writing, you can do the code, you can do the art, you can do the music, and you can get like 60 to 80% of the way there with AI, depending on what you're trying to do. And that allows, it's going to empower single or very small teams to make something that they never could have made before. And so that's something I would say that if I were a student right now, I'd really I'd be focusing on not just being multidisciplinary and making a project. I'd also be focusing on marketing. It's like, how do you get seen above all this flood of content we're about to see that this technology is going to enable. So one thought.
Well, I actually encountered AI, and started working on it as a researcher in 2006, and I was a professor. I was a professor at Vanderbilt University, and I was teaching performance art, new media, and I was informed when I was hired that, any of that stuff that you do that has to do with the internet will not be approved here for anything to do with research or tenure. Like, you can just leave that at the door when I was hired. And I was like, oh, okay. I do some stuff on the internet at that time, but as a performance artist, it was mostly my body in space and going to places. And since I was a video artist, mostly it was taking videos. And actually, I did do quite a bit of video art online. I worked with this great group called PAM, the Perpetual Art Machine, and we had been using these large touch screens that this company Apple had given us. I think they were prototyping something. It was like before the iPhone and everything. And we were using these. We installed them at the Guggenheim, and people would be able to touch these kind of different images and generate from our archive of video art, from all of our video artists, this type of video sculpture. So I was a little disappointed to hear that about the internet, and I asked them, why. I asked everyone I could meet about that question, why can't I use the internet for any research? And a lot of people told me it was a fad, and clearly it was. I don't know if anyone's heard of the internet, so it was a really big thing in 2006, so fad. So that was very interesting. That was when I encountered AI. And I started working with Dr. Pratim Singh Gupta in the Mind Matter Media Lab at Peabody School of Education, and he was a learning scientist. So back then, the people who were in AI were computer scientists who were interested in philosophy, computer scientists who were interested in learning science, learning scientists who were interested in computer science. But it kind of was this Venn diagram of people who are in philosophy, in learning, right? That's kind of why we have this framework of machine learning, because it was, how do we learn? How do machines learn? How do other people learn? How do we teach them, right? All that was part of the real guts of AI. And AI was also about neurology, and it was also about sociology and urban studies and even ethics and other types of concerns. So this was, they thought of us as kind of the woo-woo computer scientists, is what they would often call us in the various disciplines. And that was my first experience, and I loved that because I was, remember, a performance artist and a video artist. So I was already in the ephemeral realm when it came to fine arts, and I was already used to being the kind of weirdo of fine arts and being someone that galleries are like, is this even art? I love that question. Is it even art? I'm so sorry, I was eating something for my voice because it's a little dry in here. So I was already used to that question of, is this art at all? If it's invisible, is it still art? If it's an idea, is it still art? If it's nothing and no one can see it or even touch it, is it real? Is it art? I love all of those questions. That's actually why I became an artist, is I was interested in that ephemeral space where are those borders and definitions of what art is or what thought is or what understanding is, what learning is. So of course, all the fellow weirdos in AI were like, we were kin. We totally got each other and understood one another. And those questions aren't really different from now, right? We are still asking those same questions. Maybe all artists have been asking those questions, all computer scientists have been asking those questions. AI is not that old of a term, it's from the 60s, and now it's maybe more common to talk about these other phrases like deep learning or large language models or foundation models. And so, like any research field, we continue to have more and more specific areas of studies and more broad areas of studies, and someone who is in urban studies may have a specialty in AI, right? But just because someone is an expert in a field doesn't necessarily mean that they are its #1 champion. For instance, one of my really large areas of interest, and that I work tirelessly with many different types of researchers around the world, is on an issue called homelessness. That does not mean that I believe that homelessness is an answer to a problem, right? Actually, I think homelessness is the problem, and I would like to find innovative solutions across disciplines. So when I say I'm an expert in AI, that's not because I think it solves a problem, it's because I'm an expert on studying it, studying the ethics of it, studying its borders and boundaries. It doesn't mean I think it belongs everywhere and can solve every problem, but if someone had a question and said, do you think AI can solve homelessness? I'll say, okay, well, what do you think homelessness is? You know, and then we'll start there, we'll start defining what we think of, we'll start defining what we think the problems are, we'll start defining what they think ethics of, like, what people deserve as human beings. All those things are really important before I can even begin to talk to them about why AI could or couldn't even get into what they're describing, right? So I just want to throw that out there to you. I want you to feel comfortable asking me questions that you may feel like you're not allowed to, or that someone may judge you for asking, not because they'll judge you because you don't know what you're talking about, because I actually think everyone here knows what you're talking about. But if you feel like, I have concerns and I don't feel like people have taken them seriously, like I guarantee you that those of us who are in the field of AI have become afraid of these things first and are very worried about these ideas. And for about 10 years, I didn't have anyone I could talk to about them, because everyone was like, I don't even know what AI is, so I don't care about your weird ethical question. But now I have all these amazing experts who suddenly have opinions on AI, and I'd love to hear them. So I hope that kind of can open the doorway to some of your own questions. If you're concerned in any way, I don't think I'm going to I'm not going to make you feel better, but I might be able to give you some other resources or other people who may agree with you or disagree with you that you could learn from, or maybe just give you some other thoughts of like, yeah, I thought about that too, and what about this, this, and that, right? We can just kind of play. So I just wanted to open that up to you to just make you feel like this is that space where we can start to look at something in a more abstract way or a very material way. Like, yeah, that's all great and good, but what does this specific example, like, let's go. Is that a good setup?
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Does anyone want to go? Let's go. Come on. All right. We haven't heard from you today. And then pass over to Jamie. Here you go.
You sure you don't want to say a few more words? I work with him. So I'll say a few words. So my biggest issue with everything is that this is a new technology, right? But it's not a new technology. It's been around for a while. In fact, I worked with Digital Worlds Institute a long time ago, doing projects with James Oliveira. And my biggest issue is the digital divide between the haves and have-nots of who can afford it. And it goes back to sort of social media, and that people have known that this AI is coming for a long time. And it just seems to me that, you know, the content issue, the social media that's gaining all these users, and then now they own their content artistically, I have a really big problem with that. And that how certain things with AI are free, and then they're not free. And I guess my question is how are you reconciling this idea of the digital divide in education and just in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, right now, most of the AI research is still done in the same places that we consider superpowers in the world. Like those who have the superpower of AI also traditionally have had the superpowers in other formats as well, right? So we do not have a type of AI where everyone in the world is benefiting from this boom. That's completely correct. When you talk about free things that are free and that are paid, that is a kind of a common thing that we say in Silicon Valley is that if something is free, that's because you are the product, right? We've kind of all heard that phrase before, right? And the reason is because if someone is letting you use something for free, you're training it, your data and information is helping them figure out a business model, and then that business model will make money. Maybe the money is going to be selling the product back to you. That would be great, honestly, if that was very straightforward. If it was like, I help you train your thing, and then you sell it back to me at a nice price point. I probably wouldn't have that much of a problem with most software if that was the deal, except that sometimes that's not the deal. Sometimes the deal is you use my software for free, I sell intimate data about you to anyone, and those people can do anything to you. I don't like that as much, right? And that's why a lot of us who work in digital privacy and data rights and data sovereignty, we're concerned about those spaces. There's this kind of silly meme that someone sent me online that was like, somebody who's not in IT, oh yeah, let me show you the amazing AI thing I made on my cell phone, and it has my kid's face on it, and I did face swap, right? And then there'll be like someone who's in IT or in data privacy, they're like, I don't have a single digital device in my house, and I have a sledgehammer next to my printer in case it makes a funny sound, right? Like there's the difference between those of us who are more and more embedded within these systems. We are actually quite afraid, right? Because we have worked in companies or we've worked in systems where we see, oh wow, actually when you're giving them this much data, it means this, or there's these other uses, right? And it's kind of the same for those of us who maybe have loved ones who work in the military or in the armed forces or in policing, like where they tend to have more concerns because they've seen these extreme cases, right? And so I'm not trying to make anyone afraid here. I'm just saying that anyone who's worked in cybersecurity or in these things, we tend to be a little more nervous because we've seen extreme cases, and so we're concerned. We have legitimate concerns. And it's always a balance of how you teach people to be concerned and to be transparent, while also not making people just needlessly afraid, because that erodes civic trust and it erodes the ways in which we can actually create a safer society. And that's just part of what it is to be a good citizen. You have to be able to explain things rationally to people so they make good, positive decisions, and you don't terrify them to inhibit any kind of goodwill that you can have in a community that will make it stronger. I hope that's helpful.
I think it's our responsibility as artists to help to educate the public about what's happening with AI, because there's, when you talk about a divide, I have two kind of statements to say about this, but one of them is that there's also like a huge information asymmetry between the people who are in the know on this and the people who are not aware of how capable it is. And you see this with these massively viral posts on Facebook where you have a lot of people just who think this stuff is real because they just don't know what it's capable of, and like that really scares me and I think it's AI is very complex and it's very abstract, and I think as artists we're pretty good at like translating abstract, complex things into something that's approachable by people. I mean, we are communicators, and I think there's almost like a responsibility of people who use this to not only be transparent about how stuff was made, but to kind of communicate, almost meta-communicate through the medium, what the medium's about, so people can understand like what we're contending with. My other thought about that divide is that's something I worry about a lot, is that AI and compute itself, it is a form of capital, and the companies, the very large companies that already have all this capital, they're just like able to turn it into more capital. You get this concentration of power, and I don't just mean capital like money. I mean like this kind of concept of cloud capital, this concept of having control over the noosphere. And I'm very much an advocate of open source tools because, and especially local people still knowing how to run AI on their own computers and having power over that local stuff. But no matter what, the problem with all of this stuff is no matter what, it costs money. I mean, like a GPU, a very powerful gamer GPU with 24 gigs of RAM, that's a very expensive investment. And so, it used to be in the arts, if you knew how to wield a pencil well, you could get known as an artist. And I don't want to see a world where the person who's able to afford the $10,000 GPU can do better than the person with the $500 GPU. And so yeah, that's a hard one. It's definitely Yeah, but I just know like that supporting open source and making sure that you don't just have a handful of companies controlling, where it's almost like this concept of feudalism where data or compute is the land and we all become renters and we're all beholden to them, the people with the magical black boxes that that we give money to in order to live our lives properly. Like I don't want to live in a reality like that. So it's important to have control over the means of compute, I guess.
Yeah, and I think when I was like starting in 2006, a lot of educators, we were, and I myself and my collaborator, we were part of Obama's initiatives for rolling out STEM education for elementary and middle schools. And so we were thinking about how can we prepare students actually for this moment of AI, because we imagined around 2020 would be when students would start engaging with AI. And so we were building curriculum to help them just with the basic building blocks of understanding math and code at, like, I think we started around 3rd grade and moved this plan forward. So that you're right, people have been thinking about, people are going to be using, AI will be so ubiquitous by 2020, how do we prepare? So with my students that are in school, like I thought about their education, that they hadn't been prepared to take my classes, right? And a lot of people would come to us and talk about this thing about access, like, well, everyone needs, Wi-Fi, and everyone needs tablets, and everyone needs laptops. And we did try to explain that access and equity are not the same things. And so a lot of the things that we could teach, you actually didn't necessarily need a fancy tablet, because it was really thinking abstractly that we were trying to help the students with. We kept trying to say it's not the iPad. That is not the thing that is going to teach them this. It's actually helping your teachers understand this will help way more than 100 iPads will, or 10 iPads will. Like, we were really like, please teach the teachers. We don't care if they have a computer. They could do this with paper and pen. Like, please train your teachers, not. Access is not the same as equity. And I think that a lot of the predominant thinking back then was really getting everyone the devices, getting everyone fast internet, and I kind of still hear that today, even though I feel like we should know better, which is not that it equals an equity or an equitable experience for all of the students, right? Because we have so many other ways in which our educational system can support students that isn't just that, and oftentimes it made teachers feel beholden to software developers or software systems that they had to just put all of their budgets into, and then a year later the startup would fold and the teachers had nothing. I mean, we've all been there, I feel like, as educators, right, where we're the test bunnies and we put all this work into something and then it dries up and we are left doing it from scratch over and over, and we're almost on the cycles of Silicon Valley and what they're developing rather than on our own curriculum. And so there is a reason to push back and say, is this really working with my learning goals in my classroom? Is this actually helping them achieve this, rather than being super dependent on something that may not exist in a couple years? And so I think we're right to look at that judiciously. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're saying like all in or not all in on AI. But we know better as teachers to not just go based on hype cycles. But I think you've seen a lot of examples these last 2 days of maybe some fun ideas you could try, maybe some workflows that will be interesting. But yeah, I do think that it is good to remember that software cycles are not the same thing as education cycles, and you kind of have to prepare curriculum in a slightly different modality or mindset than the way that software gets upgrades and gets developments. I think it's really fun when someone will present here and then someone from the audience will say, oh, but you can do this and you can do that. And there's no way I think that any professor is going to know all of the ways that you can use even one web app like ChatGPT. And it should move faster than we can teach curriculum. We shouldn't be playing catch up, though. We should be really directing our kind of pedagogy and our values, right? And then seeing how these tools fit in.
And teaching students meta learning, as in learning how to learn, learning how to self-learn. There's really kind of an art to self-teaching in this space when it moves so quickly. So, yeah.
Thank you. I hope that was helpful. Yeah. Do we have any other? Yes. Oh, you have a mic.
Sure. So I'm going to switch topics a little bit, and this may touch on like your value as an artist, what makes you valuable in the marketplace. This also may touch on our friends here from the public school sector, thinking about like when do you use AI and why might that be important. And I want to kind of maybe shine a light on something that Matt was saying yesterday in his talk about being an illustrator and using AI and pointing out the bad anatomy. for me, I see the value in what comes out of your brain, the ideas that you're putting on the page or on the screen. And Matt's value is becoming less and less about the fact that he can render the figure beautifully. His value is in that he has that knowledge that the anatomy is wrong and that he knows anatomy, that fundamental knowledge of knowing anatomy. And I think even for Kirsten, like you demonstrated that like you can generate 100 options for a really cool sci-fi race car, but the renderings of those are not particularly valuable. It's the ideas that you fed into the system to get the output. And so I'm curious for you folks to talk a little bit more about the value in your thinking and the ideas and how that might maybe more become the commodity in the future that we as humans are going to be paid for, and less about the actual output, given that the outputs are being it's faster and faster, they look better and better. And so then maybe that's not the value. It's more about how you think.
I guess my question, because I came from a fine art background, and it's been really wonderful to see through my studies, and then now, being a professor first in performance art and now in AI and art, it doesn't seem to me like it has changed that fundamentally what we teach artists, because I think it has always been about the ideas. It is, like I'm just trying to hear what you're like specifically what you're talking about, because you just kind of described my MFA, right? Like I'm like, well, actually I didn't learn AI in my MFA, but I also there were some fundamentals that they may teach us, but most of it was really about show us, how you arrived at that destination. And then we can maybe suggest other ways to move around this wall you may have built, or think about it in a different way. And there are very different ways that people teach art. I know that you teach art differently at Ringling than we might at Digital Worlds, and then differently. I did my MFA at UT Austin, and they have their own sort of school of thinking, right? And it's kind of amazing how different we are. We're actually not very much the same. All of these different amazing art schools all over the world all have their kind of own little way of helping people arrive at that place, but it to me has always seemed like it was about the ideas. Some of amazing artists that I really look up to and I collaborate with are incredibly technically proficient at something, and some of them are not. And for me, I was technically proficient at something that really didn't matter in art for a long time, which was like coding. That was really useless in a lot of ways for art for a long time. And so what I was proficient at was thinking and researching and working collaboratively. And only recently that code kind of paid off, but before then it was really that I would say I was proficient at nothing technically. I didn't draw, I didn't paint, I didn't make very good prints. My pots are always crooked. My sculptures are okay, but kind of weird. Like I was very good at like conceptual art, right? It was technically unproficient. So I don't know. It almost feels like it's still there. It's still that same. So I don't know. I'm sorry to like.
Yes, no, I want to agree with you. It is still there, but the current fear about AI is that, oh no, now that AI can render a pretty picture, I'm worthless. And especially in the younger, and that's what we were hearing from our colleagues, they're afraid that like, well, since AI can draw it so good, well then what am I doing? And I think it's our job moving forward to remind them that no, you're gonna get paid to think. It's gonna become less and less about how good you are with a pencil, I think.
Well, and my engineering students say the same thing, right? Like I had my freshman last semester, and one of the first questions that one of my engineering students asked me was, is this it? Am I even gonna have a job anymore? Like my whole life, my parents had me have a tutor for coding. I did a coding boot camp every summer. I had internships at tech, and now I'm being told that I was guaranteed to have a job if I just got an engineering degree, and now I have no career, I have no future. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I have no job now. I said, honey, you don't have a job, you're in school. What are you talking about? Like, what job do you not have? You haven't even started yet, So I'm like, so yeah, okay, that job you thought you were gonna have, you might not have, but like, you have 4 years now. Let's just figure this new job out, right? Like, let's navigate those waters, right? So it's actually not, it's quite similar. These two areas, and maybe, engineering and art might be feeling it first, and everyone else is gonna feel it next. But we are suddenly in that space where we thought we were going to have a certain job or a certain life, and now we will have something else, and they're in the best space to actually discover that.
Well, there are, and also there, like, I absolutely agree. It is very much about the idea and being able to. I think that rendering or, polish, that the type of thing, so students always overvalue rendering. And I partially blame, at least in the entertainment design world, companies got the idea that you can use concept art as marketing art. And so they'd actually get their concept artists to dress up their designs. But when you look internally, a lot of the most productive designs out there are very quick sketches. They don't have that kind of polish. And so, I think there's a lot of distorted ideas of what is expected of students entering kind of any design profession. And because if you talk to the creative directors and stuff, they're always about like, we hire you based on how you think. We want you to solve problems in a novel yet practical way, and in a way that is appealing and beautiful and smart in a way that we value. And now you can dress up, your drawings in such a way as to get more eyeballs on your work. And I think that the current, back to the idea of art pollution from the talk yesterday, I think part of the concern is that if everything looks hyper polished and really eye-catching, then what can you use to actually get your ideas seen? You could have great ideas, but ideas, it can be kind of hard sometimes to get those ideas in front of the right eyes when you have so many beautiful things competing, even if they're totally empty and vapid. And it's I think some really good ideas are subtle. They don't immediately present themselves as something that would trend on Instagram, for example. And so it's like, I think that's really kind of part of the concern is, but yeah, ideas themselves, I think having good ideas is probably even more valuable now. I kind of wonder if the public is going to get burnt out on beautiful polish and want things that looks more raw and has more challenging ideas than they're used to. I think sometimes maybe we don't give the consumers of art and media enough credit when we worry about this stuff.
Yes. Oh,
Over here.
There's one here and then there.
Going back to something you mentioned earlier about categorizing art versus other practical things, I think that's an artifact of people who want to separate. That's a knife that cuts in places where it shouldn't. My personal feeling about art is that you can find it in any discipline. And even within art, there are people who want to specify modernism versus artificial. It doesn't exist. It only exists for people who are outside the field. People who are artists, all the people in this room for sure, are very broadly backed. They have interests that spread across science and biology and sociology and are very interested in people. And to specify, artificial intelligence at the present is more like actual ignorance. We can use artificial intelligence maybe to get to a point of actual intelligence. But it's only a tool, as that box of our tools is very large right now, but it is just another tool, and it's not just in art, it's everywhere. And we need to be more intelligent about it.
I totally agree. And like any tool, it proposes a solution right? They have that saying, right, when you have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And AI is similar in that way, that it is just a tool, and sometimes that could be a problem because it's telling you how to have a solution. It's imagining that there is a data-driven or a way of imagining a predictive future based on very specific types of coded data sets. And there are information that is not in those data sets, and therefore we see a tool and imagine that solutions can only fit into that tool shape, right? And so I think that a lot of us are feeling that. That's where that stupidity comes in, right? Where you're like, yeah, but the most amount of data points we have are financial data, we have a lot of, legal data, we have all of these parts of understanding what it is to be a human, and then a lot of those absences of that scatter plot of information is not there, that kind of qualia that makes us human. And some people will say, well, then we need to make that into data so that the data sets are smarter. Maybe. Or maybe we apply AI as a tool and we know what it's good at solving and what it should stay out of. I don't know, right? So, yeah.
I think we're in a time right now where as artists, we're about exploring where that line is. And I think it's, it's one of our purposes as creators. In the same way a comedian, the whole purpose of a lot of stand-up comedy is to find exactly where the boundary is, the line is, where of the social norms and mores and everything. And in the same way, I think with art, we're trying to find that we're the explorers and scientists in a way of this new space.
Okay, so uncrafted question. There are things floating in this bubble, and they have not been strung together. However, I'm still going to verbalize. So I'm thinking about how quickly technology is moving and the world that we're in, and how we can't rely on any particular program or any particular application, anything really, and so how important digital agility is right now in the world that we're in, especially now that AI is like taking off. Okay, so I'm thinking about that, and it sort of feels like to me that the scale of importance is just shifting a little bit. Like there was a time when rendering was all, it was 80%. If you couldn't do it, you know what I mean? Like you're at the top of your game if you can. You're the top of the pile. And it sort of seems like, as the gentleman over there was saying, that to some degree, because it's not about the specific application and the specific computer, the specific tool, that it's about the permeability, being able to move between all those spaces and collaborate with them and kind of like creative extrapolation. Like, sure, AI can do this and it can do this and it can do this, but I can do this. And how can I take all of that and mix it up with me and produce something? So it's like you never lose your job as long as you're still developing you know what I mean? And filling all those variables are coming into play. So I feel like the conversation, because I'm always thinking about what is the conversation I have with a student, it feels like this is their time to really be valued as an individual, because everyone can do it. So when you bring you to it, that's where it becomes different. That's where the art lives, is in that space. So you may see it, you may dance it, you may sing it, you may eat it, but bringing yourself to it is really what's going to be important. That's really what's going to keep you from not having a job. Is that creative extrapolation. Can you move between all the spaces? Does that make sense? MacGyver.
Yeah, no, that very much makes sense. Yeah, no, that is well put. I'm glad you have that takeaway from this, because I definitely agree that it's not just about expressing yourself as an individual. It's about connecting with humanity in general. I think we're just all craving connection, and so much of art is making things where someone can look at that and say, like, I relate to that, or like there's something about that says that there's something similar in both of our minds, and I'm not alone in the universe. And so it's very much about that. And and back to what you're saying, about being nimble. Yeah, that's a very, very key skill going forward. And as I said before, if I were an educator, I would focus on teaching students how to be nimble like that, because it is a skill. It is and yeah, it's part of. We're pretty, as humans, we're pretty adaptable, and so I think AI is really going to push the limits of that in really interesting ways, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as teachers, our jobs are always how to prepare students for a future that we didn't experience as when we were growing up, right? We're preparing them for a world that is in some way speculative. We're doing our best to imagine a possible future that where they will be valued. And so we tend to go back to those core of saying, you know, it's in yourself, like you have the tools that you need. And as a teacher, you're there to help them organize their thoughts and thinking and see their strengths and weaknesses and be able to adapt. And so we also see our students not as just future workers. We see them as people, and as we see the dignity in them, and we want to honor that, right? So, you know, as teachers, this is always the process we have, no matter what future tools or future jobs that they will have, or future people that they will be, and future parents that they will lead. And so that I don't think that AI has in any way fundamentally changed that, right, being a teacher. But for my students, I do show them a lot of diverse tools, and oftentimes they tell me, are you going to show us a lot of tutorials? And I actually don't, because I say, you know, I learned a whole lot of software that does not exist anymore when I was in school, and I learned a whole lot of coding languages that doesn't exist anymore. And so I think the most important thing for me to do is to teach you how to learn, and then teach you, and each of you are going to have a different answer for that. I am not going to do one tutorial and then everyone will boom know it, because that actually isn't even good teaching pedagogy anyways. So what I'm going to do is help you find out the way that you learn, and then show you all of, like, a whole bunch of different tutorials, and I'll show you a little bit about, you know, maybe we're going to set up a GitHub together. Maybe I kind of have to handhold them for a certain part of it, but I do know the learning outcome for that is that they will learn how to learn software. Not that they will have to learn this software, if that makes sense, right? And I think we know that. We know that, like, I think intuitively as teachers.
I had a question about like imagining that future. You know, I see stuff on Reddit where it'll be like a cool robot that paints pictures, and the comments will say stuff like, I wish they wouldn't make AI that does the fun stuff, do the menial stuff, do my laundry and plumbing, and like, so do you imagine, like, is it coming for all jobs, and it'll be doing plumbing and laundry also, and will college still be around in 10 years and stuff? Just how you imagine the future.
I guess my question to you would be, because I have my supposed answers, but I want to ask you, because I feel like you have an answer too, which is why, if you were a company and you wanted to show someone how powerful you were, would you use art as the first demonstration of that power? Because that's what they're doing, right? All AI models have been being made for, you know, since the 60s. Like, we've been perfecting this technology, and the first moment that we're sharing it with the world of how powerful it is we're using art. Why do you think that is? I mean, I'll kind of open that up to you and everyone else. Like, why? Is it marketing?
Propaganda?
Does it look nice and friendly and cuddly and it's not scary? Maybe? Yeah. What do you
Because
think?
most people view art as magic and very difficult to do, and
Right.
a very, very, very small number of people can do it.
And it hits
So-
like our heart songs, right? We're like, oh, it hits an emotional place. Yeah, it's hard to do. What do you think?
Related to that, you know, if I was in that position, I would want to neutralize the magic, emotional, inspirational quality of art, because we've seen art in various forms used as the trigger for revolutions of various sorts. And if it's just ordinary. Okay,
Maybe you get
fair
them a
enough.
microphone. Sorry, so.
Oh, he said it best, but it's just like, yes, the powers that be can use art to inspire, but they can also use it to neutralize the power of art to inspire people to risk making changes. You know, it can become so banal because everybody can do it.
You're
That
just saying
art no
they're almost
longer-
like trying to disempower artists by like
Yes.
watering down art.
Yes,
basically.
that's right.
Yeah.
I noticed how quickly, because I've been studying AI for a long time. I don't think it's magic. I don't think there's a magical thing within AI, but I have noticed how quickly it's being put in that realm of like, and then boom, it just does it, right? As if almost it just is this expertise that has emerged from all human understanding. I think oftentimes people think when you're working with a specific model, I'll ask my students, how do you think this works, before I explain it to you how it works, and they'll say, oh, I think generators just take all the images in the whole world and then, think of my language and then give me back something. And it's like I'm collaborating with every artist that ever lived. And I'm like, okay, but then let's look at some of the bias here. Like when we say paint me a night sky, why does it usually look more like a Disney still than it does like an embroidery from Indonesia, right? So that isn't every single possible way of seeing the world. And so there is a worldview there that we're imagining is everything, but it tends to look like maybe the backgrounds of the people who created this specific tool. And that's okay, I'm not like calling them out for that, but I'm saying that is not necessarily though the truth then, how we imagine it. So I think it's really important to demystify these things for our students and not let this sit in the world of magic, which is what we do as art teachers too. We say like, okay, I know it looks magical and that person can just naturally paint that well, but actually this is how they did it. We kind of, we pull up the hood and show people how to actually, build the machine, so to speak.
To answer your question about why art first, so to add on to what you were saying is that art it's the perfect medium for spreading virally on the internet right now. The internet is very image and video geared, and so the media can very quickly make content that people can get aboard and just they look at it in their phone and in 1 second they get, oh, what's going on here? It's not just a bunch of text. And you look at recent history, like when NFTs popped off, that's when crypto in general went way up, and it's because the media was giving so much attention to NFTs. Why? Because it's perfect for the media. You have these really flashy, weird looking images that they can put up, and then all of a sudden, crypto has this relatable, beautiful, not always beautiful, but sometimes beautiful face to it, and that's what gets people talking. I mean, that's part of the power of art. So it's no surprise to me that they would use art as a way to popularize, just generative AI in general. Now, what you're saying about, automating the boring stuff, or, so robotics has been lagging behind, generative media. And it's because media, it's largely based on data, and there's this robust open source community that allows development to happen very, very quickly. In the world of robotics, when it comes to things like folding laundry, you have a lot of closed companies with proprietary designs for robots. It's a lot harder for information to spread and be exchanged, so that development is slower due to that. But I will say that as of about, I believe a year ago, there has been a huge advance in the development of robotics, and now enabling basically small startups to make their own robots that have very sophisticated movement. And without getting too much into the weeds, if you're familiar with the idea of reinforcement learning, that used to be something a human had to supervise. Now there's LLM supervised, there's basically AI supervised reinforcement learning, where they're using one kind of AI to train a robotic AI, which is actually a simulation inside of a piece of engineering software, like mechanical engineering software. So you can have an AI helping to teach a robot to walk, for example. And there's a lot more parts available that are like stock parts, like servo motors and stuff, that are now accessible enough that we're going to start seeing this ecosystem of small companies making amazing things with robots. And there's more open source stuff now in controlling these robots. So I don't know, my prediction is that we're going to start to see a lot more news about the, because it is ironic that, picking up boxes and moving them in a factory, it was not automated before art. But if you look at kind of the economics of what it takes to make a robot, you can see why it's lagging behind something like, media generation. But it is coming.
This year I went to GTC. It was the first time that it was in person in 4 years, and it was in San Jose, and it's what NVIDIA has as their conference, and they show all the things they're advancing in AI, not just their company, but others. But I definitely recommend they have a video of the keynote where Jensen's talking about all the different kind of innovations that they made, and I'm not trying to get you to buy into any of it. It's just that he does a really good job of saying what is happening in the world with AI, from robotics to space exploration to water data systems to predictive weather pattern analysis to different types of chips to also to AI generated art. So that if you are interested in how AI is the state of where it is in other fields, because you're interdisciplinary artists and you have interest in outside of art but also in sciences, watching his keynote, it's just half an hour and it's free on YouTube. I recommend it. It doesn't mean I think you should buy NVIDIA stock or anything, just, I think he does a really great job of what is the state of the art. And it's a GTC, is it GTC, the Global what is it? What does it even stand for? I have no idea. Conference, I think GTC Global Technology Conference. I've never, right, yes. So I recommend just watching that video if you want to say like, what is the most advanced thing that people are doing with AI in all the adjacent fields to our own. That's a great kind of state of the art. And he does it with a lot of panache, so it kind of it's entertaining. I show it to my students too to be like, all right, this is what they're saying is out there. What do you think? What are your predictions? Just to kind of see the lay of the land right now. Yes.
Yeah, I do own some NVIDIA stock. I just want to say how relieving it is to have encountered two very brilliant, talented women in the field, in this field. It's encouraging to, I love men too, but it's just nice to see you out there, and you're so both are very articulate, well-educated women in this area, and it is a novelty. So so thank you for coming out. What helps me have some relief to this whole notion of AI taking over the world, and you know, the fears of the black box and all of that. And I have been in mental health as well as a counselor in crisis counseling, but also a fine artist. Is we have something also called the black box, and it's the unspoken items that happened before someone committed suicide. So I mean, it's everything from the darkest of dark to how to bring people out into the light. And something that relieves the fear for me is thinking how we can focus AI on something that is not necessarily human, like, you know, the fact that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience, that part of being human. Like, how do we deal with microplastics in the water? Is that something that AI can help us solve problems that are real to the human being in us? Where it's so rampant, and in the billionth and 0.000 centimeters of microplastic, that kind of math, that only a computer could kind of like get to that nitty gritty. And then the other, I really don't know what I'm asking, I'm just kind of throwing this out here. Maybe you can find some reason, is also that looking forward 7 generations. You had mentioned it yesterday. We had a nice moment there with talking about protecting the human going into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a really strong wall between the artificial and the human, because we made all of these systems. And I think the more that we try, and I also encourage my students to not use phrases like the AI, right? There is a field of AI, right? We have, and the field of AI includes people who are urban planners and mayors and doctors and lawyers. It's a huge, broad field, almost the same as size as something like computer science or humanities, right? It's a huge, big, old field, but there is not the AI. And I do often in my talks, not this one, but other talks, that I love talking to just diverse groups of audiences, but I hear a lot of people will ask me questions like, well, what does the AI think about this? Or what does the AI think about that? As if there's only one AI, as if we've kind of moved past this whole experimentation of should we, shouldn't we, where are the ethical boundaries, where are the legal boundaries, and we're already to the oracle of the AI, and now we just ask it and we have to listen to what it says. But we created this, right? And if you open the hood of any AI system, it's hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of developers who are making decisions, writing lines of code, and then it's people who are using it and feedback. It's people all the way down, right? And people who are opting into systems and making choices, and some people who are feeling maybe they don't have as much agency as they want, right? But I think it's really important to remind us that technology is a reflection of human values, and it's made by humans. We don't get an out, we don't get a pass of like, I don't know, it just showed up one day, and like, no, we made it, right? So we do need to take some responsibility for that, and also build in responsibility within our civic systems, right?
What blows my mind to kind of branch off that a bit is this idea that we created this system, but we currently have people who are, it's kind of like, they're using the scientific method to try to understand neural networks. So they'll poke at a layer, or they'll change, and in the same way that a neuroscientist will change something in the brain and then try to figure out how the brain works from that, we're now doing that with our works of engineering. I feel like that is a big turning point for us as humans, that we're using the scientific method on our works, because at that point, it's like our works are kind of like acting like nature. If we see nature as this thing that, we have to study in that way because there's no manual, you could just go to a certain page and understand it. That kind of mystique has it's like another layer of nature to me. Like it's very interesting.
All right, other questions?
This is great. I love I'm just hearing from everybody what's going in all of our heads and stuff. I think of what you said yesterday about, or maybe it was earlier. We were talking about maybe it was during the development of the character that we were making, but you talked about the mythopoetic, and I think about approaches towards truth and these questions of like what and how to use AI and our relationship to it, our relationship as part of nature and all the things extending from us, then by extension being natural in some sense. And I think about what are we going to do? What do we get to do? What do we get to do? That's exciting to me. Like, what do we get to do? And then what will we have to do? I'm presenting those two questions within the context of other exponential technologies. And I'm thinking about a conversation I had with an archaeologist a year ago, visiting this site in Northern California, this lake called Clear Lake that has been a lake that's been standing there for 20,000 years. 20,000 years, so it's one of the oldest lakes in North America that's been continuously located there. So there's 20,000 years of sedimentary deposits. And within those sedimentary deposits on the lake bank, they found, archaeologists found a spear point, an obsidian spear point. And I think of geological time and deep time, and this obsidian, which is a young rock, but it's still thousands of years old. And I think of the technology of taking that obsidian rock and turning it into a spear point. And the tool, Homo habilis. And we look at all this stuff, and I'm thinking about this archaeologist and I'm thinking about archaeology prior to this conversation as, oh well, archaeologists are primarily dealing and interested in the past. And here I have this archaeologist telling me how important archaeology is right now, more than ever, because we're in a time of rapid change. And so we can look at the sedimentary deposits in Clear Lake, his area of expertise, and we can find the time when the global temperatures changed just by 2 degrees, and it completely changed the flora of that landscape. And so suddenly plants that there were abundant for people to have a gathering lifestyle were no longer there, and they had to start grinding acorns to make meal, to make flour. And it's like this is technology. This is a response to rapid changes in our environment. And I throw all that stuff out there, like thinking about how we are in this time of exponential change again, because of this technology and because of what's happening in our climate. And I just present this questions like what do we get to do? Like looking at the past, and specifically within this container of all past exponential technologies. Like what can we learn from our possibilities? The super fun things that we get to do is expanding like what it means to be a human, while still being grounded in these like philosophical questions of like that we can't seem to get around, like as a collective, like this Cartesian anxiety of like why am I here? And if I don't have to pick fruit all day, what do I do with all this time? Like what makes a life valuable? Like what do I focus my attention? And why do I think, like just having never thought of it until the question was posed, like why do you think like AI is being presented in visual form? Because it wants can I cuss? People want my fucking attention. Like, what is the value that I present to a company? It's my attention. Like, I am so far from survival needs that I confuse like my wants with needs. And the corporation that is for profit wants my attention. It wants to convince me through its marketing that I have a real need, that I have to spend my time, which is primarily leisure-oriented, if we're honest about it, with meeting some artificial need. And so it's a few things, right? Like artificial intelligence and where is this artificial need gonna come? Like that comes from that. But primarily, I guess the question is how do you guys, because you mentioned it a few different ways, and I was super like, okay, let's keep talking. Like this, metacognition, right? But just the exponential technologies and like all of this, like, how are we thinking about it? What's happening? You guys are having these conversations with fantastically intelligent, creative people all the time. This is like very, in the context of your learning and experience in AI, like I know nothing. And but I want to know what does help, just give us a few more morsels. Like what are the conversations that are happening in context to other exponential technologies and how humans have dealt with those?
I guess I can give you a search term, which is kind of a word that keeps coming up. I've been spending a lot of time in San Francisco, and there's a lot of talk about post-scarcity, and and so I think looking into that and looking into maybe how some science fiction authors have approached that. If you look at, like Ian M. Banks' this culture series, he kind of deals with what is the logical conclusion if we have a culture where we just have no needs, like need to do's at all, like what would happen. And in that world, fads come and go very quickly, and because I think one thing that is always going to be scarce, as long as we still have the same types of human brains we have, is social status. And that even in that world, people are following fads, and there are all these like rapid trends happening because people are always jockeying for some form of status among their in-group. And so, a lot of, you have to imagine that, in a post-scarcity world, people are going to be just, maybe we're just all going to be living in games. We're all going to be basically playing various games all the time, and because our brains thrive on this edge between I guess you could call it like it's this edge of focus in between something being too easy, which is boredom, and something being too hard, which is frustration. And in a survival situation, we're geared to always be sort of on that edge where we're not fully relaxed and bored, and we're not so like stressed out that and like I think people seek that edge, and we'll just end up creating games in a world in which we're riding that edge all the time, and maybe we're doing it to impress our friends, but it's something that might be the motivator, but like it's I have a lot of thoughts on this. But like, yeah, I think back to the idea of post-scarcity, there's a lot of thoughts about this right now, and people in kind of the tech and AI world of, what would that look like? And there's a lot of people who think we should be putting our foot on the gas when it comes to AI, because it's our responsibility to get to this utopia where labor costs are reduced to zero, and that, there's a lot that could be said about it. There's a whole movement called that. I could give you another keyword for that if you're interested in. It's called effective accelerationism. So that's a rabbit hole for you.
So I threatened my husband over there that if a specific topic came up, I was going to tap him in. Is it okay with your permission I wanted to ask if anyone should chime in, because he's from San Francisco, and he and I are both incredibly passionate around homelessness, as I mentioned earlier. And so I'm from New York. I'm not from San Francisco, but when I lived there, I also met with a lot of leaders who are thinking of different ways of helping the homeless population, of understanding their needs. There are some incredible thinkers there that are doing wonderful initiatives that we would volunteer for, and so we are both really passionate about this issue. And I think we have yet to see a time where technology made homelessness better, right? Like a big boom in technology often increases homelessness, and so this is something that I'm very concerned about. And as an Indigenous person, you know, we don't have homelessness on reservations, and so I'm also very interested in learning about how this urban phenomena is going to affect our future. So I don't know if you want to tap in and say some things about what do you think about ideology and AI and homelessness? I know it's really, I'm just putting him straight on the
Yeah,
spot.
really.
Sorry. He's like, oh, thanks a lot. But this is, you know, I was like, if this comes up about the future of work, and is it going to, what do you think?
I mean, it's a real concern, and that's one thing that makes San Francisco such a frustrating and confounding place. Is on the one hand, you do have like the EAC people who are thinking really grand ideas about a world where we don't have scares, kind of like a Star Trek post Bell Riots kind of world where we don't have scarcity, and then at the same time you just look out the window and you see all the scarcity that you can imagine, and it's just right there on the street. And I think I feel like personally, and this is just my own personal feeling, that without a major ideological shift in our society, as American society I'm talking about, but probably globally too. I just don't know much about global society. I know about where I live. Without a major ideological shift, we're not going to see the gains from, like Kirsten was talking about, like all these cool robotic labor-saving technologies. We're not going to see the gains distributed in a way where we actually have a post-scarcity society. We're going to have a bifurcated society where we have like a leisure class and a class that's unable to make ends meet, and that's really concerning to me. And I don't have personally a good answer to that beyond having as many conversations like this as possible and trying to affect kind of, and when I say ideological shift, I don't mean like a big Politburo style propaganda campaign or something like that. I mean more of like a 60s style consciousness raising on a grand scale about what the value of labor is, what the value of work is, and how we can start to adapt those values into a 21st century technological reality in which like the values of ideas and thinking can spread their fruits to a population of people that maybe aren't as intimately involved in the technology as like the accelerationists in San Francisco might be.
Can I comment on that? Yeah, please. I think, you know, me and Eamon's strategy is always to have conversations with people about these topics because they're difficult, and I learn from your perspectives, and so please.
So, you know, in a visit to Camilla's house in Miami, which is a homeless shelter, I was surprised to find out that people can come in and just get dry clean clothing. So there's a lot of people that walk around with carts with their clothing and this and that, but you can just go in and you don't have to live there. You can just show up, get the clothing is dry clean, washed, and get it. So there's other things. So that's human centric. You know what I'm saying? That's human centric. So you have other things like there was these cases of drug resistance tuberculosis. So tuberculosis is eradicated through drugs, totally. But when it becomes resistant, then you die from it. So the solution was supervised therapy that is human-centric. That means going to someone and telling them, you have to take this. And it's not necessarily an app for a homeless person that doesn't have an app. It's human-centric. So I think that going back to the the laundering solution, I think AI can help in that regard where you have situations for homelessness where there are approachable avenues for going back to the mental health issue. Much of homelessness goes back to, and many of our problems goes back to mental health issues, which can go back to some medication will resolve some of those issues, And I think that you have to have situations where they're identified on the streets, and then with like that dry cleaning kind of situation, they can be identified through AI and tracked. And in Miami, it's done where people are given their mental health medications on the street where they are living at that particular moment to take them out of those mental health crises, and then you go from there. But I think it's just a systemic problem where you can solve it on paper. Oh, well, okay, just take your TB medication and you're gonna not have this tuberculosis spreading through communities. But unless you have that human-centric approach, that's what's not being discussed in those circles, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a term that I'm playing with in my research lab right now, which I call AI and human thriving, so that we can create measurement techniques to understand if there are human thriving outcomes from the AI rather than it necessarily being problem solving, but is human thriving the outcome? And so I've worked primarily with public health groups and a couple of different initiatives in public health in Florida. And those problems are so complicated, right? And there are spaces where AI can help, but there are also spaces that we need new types of measurement tools to actually understand like where it's being implemented and what is missing. And a common example we use when we're trying to explain to people the type of research we're doing so that we can help them, or we can just work, broadly interdisciplinary in an interdisciplinary way, is sometimes you can give a patient an iPad and say, with this tool you'll be able to keep track of your medication and you'll be able to communicate with your doctor, and here's how you use the MyChart, and we give it to them, and then I'll interview the doctors and say, what do you assume they're going to be able to do with that? And they're like, oh, they're going to track their medication and they're going to communicate with their family and they're going to message me on MyChart, and I say, okay, let's test that. Well, how are we going to test that? We have to kind of create a UX metric to be able to test that they're able to do that. Now, what happens if they're in cognitive decline? Do we have a measurement strategy where we're going to measure every 3 days? Are they still able to do the baseline, right? Because that with cognitive decay, now we've given them an iPad and we've taken away the nurse that maybe checked in on them every week because we assume that they have this thing that's going to supplement and change. But if we don't have sort of a feedback loop that actually the human thriving outcome is better care, more rapid care, they can communicate with their family better, but we actually check in on them in a week and they say, I no longer know how to use my iPad because I'm in cognitive decline and it doesn't make sense to me anymore. And so those are those kind of spaces that we're trying to define. Is AI actually doing what we think it is? Is it not a solution, or is it a solution at this phase and it's a great solution, and then once we get to that phase, that's not going to work anymore, right? And just mapping that out is really important so that we are using it in a way that is predictable and trustworthy.
Any other comments?
Oh, just a quick one.
George, you gotta be on mic, man.
Oh.
It's the rules of the game.
And I'm sorry I'm not able to say it on mic. I'm
No,
very bad at
it's
reprocessing
fine.
power. It's not.
Yeah, no, it's just, this is all being fed into an AI and we're training on it.
I'm just curious if you feel more optimistic about the future or pessimistic. Is that something that is evolving day to day? Like if you look back 5 years ago, did you feel better about things than you do now, or do you feel better now?
I think that, I see hope in the people around me every day. That's where my hope is connected to nature, and it's connected to my community, and it's connected, even in the eyes of strangers, where I see, I recognize my own dignity in them and their dignity in myself. So for me, the technology piece doesn't change that. And I know we're living in a very conflict-ridden world, and we're a very polarized society. But I actually don't believe we are once I turn down my devices and I walk into nature, or I walk in with other people, or I speak with children. When I remember all those signals that I need as a human being to calibrate myself to my community, those things don't seem as true. I have this little metric that I use, you're welcome to steal it or throw it in the trash, which is my neighbor thinks very differently politically than me on absolutely every possible way you could imagine. He's also my best friend in my neighborhood. And so I imagine that if I hear something on the news or I see something in a meme, and it would make me distrust this man that checks out my house when there's ever a storm, he watches over my dogs when I don't ask him to, he's looking out for me in every way. And if there's anything I could read about his political belief people, whatever, that makes me distrust him, then that I need to throw in the trash. right? Because I cannot allow information that's outside of that basic community trust of a neighbor to actually sit in my brain. I'll just consider that brain rot. I'll throw that right in the trash. So, because I know with my own eyes and my own sensors, this is a good man, and we care about each other a lot. We got each other's back, right? And so I have to kind of look at my truth in that way, that I cannot accept information from somewhere else and then apply it to somewhere locally. That's going to change the way I engage and interact with media, and that's how I can kind of move past not just that filter bubble, but a distortion metric, I would say, right? So that's really important, though, to have those real-world connections that can ground you and say, like, I know how to trust my neighbor, and if we don't know how to trust our neighbors, then whatever thing is making you not trust your neighbor, I don't know, throw that in the trash. I would say that's my suggestion. I hope that's helpful. I don't know.
I'm going to ask a question for clarification. It's like, what time scale are you talking about here? What do you mean by the future?
Oh, kids born today.
Kids born today.
So like the next, 80 years or so? I think anytime you have a lot of very rapid change, humans like to have a certain amount of change, but if you, like, we're all about finding these like Goldilocks zones, and if you go beyond that zone where there's too much change, that creates stress. We have all these very delicate systems. Our world is very interconnected. We have, COVID taught us that things can pretty easily break and get disrupted to some degree. And I think that what I'm getting at is that I think in the short term, things are going to feel worse for probably more than 50% of people, just because rapid change is uncomfortable for humans, just like as a base level. But I think that it is reasonable to expect that a kid born today could have overall a good life, even despite the problems that we're facing and worries about climate change. Obviously, it's like there's so much inequality in the world that it's hard to answer that question, because I think a lot of the people who are in our spheres, I could talk in terms of that type of geographical location and lifestyle and all that, and say that, yeah, I think things are going to be overall pretty good. But for someone like on an island somewhere who's like dealing with climate problems 50 years from now, I can't speak for them, But I think for people close to our situation, that like I'm pretty optimistic. I have definitely oscillated back and forth, especially just thinking about all of these things. But overall, I think I'm in a pretty good place in my predictions.
I'm gonna bring out a buzzword and follow up on that question, which may be what George was getting at in a way. Ask a Silicon Valley term. What are your individual P-dooms? Your percentage chance of doom from AI? Do you believe? We haven't talked about it because I think it's close to nonsense, but the fear that AI will become super intelligent and make us all slaves making paperclips or whatever it is. But that's just my opinion and Nick Bostrom's opinion. I would like you guys' opinion on your P-doom.
I have definitely been on panels with those two people you mentioned, like Kurzweil, and it's a wild ride. I mean, if anyone ever offers you to be on a panel with some of these amazing thinkers who write superintelligence or who actually believe in the AI apocalypse and superintelligence, and that it's 2 years away, I think one of them was like, it's 2 years away, I would recommend being on a panel because it's amazing. It's really interesting to hear how they think about the world, and that's just been one of the most fun panels I've ever been on with them. I don't necessarily have.
I would do that.
I would just recommend it. It was so. I just asked him, like, I know I was supposed to answer questions. No, I just asked him like a million questions. I was like, what about this? What about that? And what about, how come you just bought a house if that's true? And how come you just had a kid? And then, like, I'm asking all these questions. I was just like, this is wild. And it's a great tool to teach about something, is to take an extremist position. Whether, I may believe that he might not totally have that position. It's just his kind of pedagogical way of teaching. And I actually respect it. It's an interesting framework to come out with an extreme opinion and then talk about that possibility. But for me, it still seems somewhat academic, and it is, I do talk to my students about, simulation theory. I don't believe we live in a simulation, but I talk to them about it. It's a really fascinating idea to think about how we think. It's not the most interesting idea in that space, though. There are other ones that I find more interesting, and same with the superintelligence and this concept of, if the superintelligence were to come from AI would begin to have a way, this is kind of trying to summarize it as best I can if anyone isn't familiar or doesn't have a strong opinion, not that you should, is that essentially if a superintelligent being were to emerge from the AI processes that we have created in a way that we didn't monitor or couldn't control or shut down, what would it do with us? How would it affect us, right? And then some people think that it would be so absurd that we'd actually have no way of noticing it or imagining it, and we may cease to exist just because it decided to turn off oxygen in the world so that it could continue its growth pattern. Or it could coexist with us, or anything in between, right? And that's kind of, I guess, like the framework of what we're talking about, what would happen with the superintelligent, you might want to call it a being if you want to, but it's really about how differently machine ways of thinking when you can understand billions and billions of data points instantaneously, and you just have this asymmetry between how it thinks and how we think, and it becomes almost like this alien arrival. And I think that's often where we get on those panels with some of the superintelligence people, is really talking about that. If we were to, it's almost that same question of like if aliens were to come, it's a really that arrival moment of how do we talk and communicate with an intelligence that is not inherently human. And it's not there yet. Right now we still are very much creating AI in the ways that we understand and can use it as a tool. But I do love those types of thought experiments where we can imagine how do you communicate to something that isn't human-like? And some researchers have said, well, what about interspecies communication, right? Because we communicate to turtles and whales communicate to each other, and we communicate with whales and we communicate to other types of systems like algae or lichen, right? We are in the same planet, we are communicating with them at all times, and we think we understand them, but we actually don't, right? We're always in the process of learning more about them. And so in that way, a lot of people are thinking of AI intelligence like just another type of intelligence that isn't human, and it's not animal. Maybe it's more like plants, maybe it's more like algae, maybe it's more like mycelium.
Yeah, all really interesting thoughts. I mean, I'm kind of dealing with, again, like this type of hypothetical in the world of Synthara, where you have, you're all probably familiar with the gray goo scenario of, AI nanobots kind of take over and turn everything into more nanobots. And I kind of took that idea and ran with it, but instead of gray goo, I call it rainbow goo, because it's this whole ecosystem of they're actually microbots, not nanobots, but of this. If you can imagine like the idea of smart matter, or like we talk about smart cities, and like take that to its logical conclusion, where all of our architecture is kind of living in a sense, and it can adapt based on our current needs in like a very fluid way, but it kind of builds and grows more like coral or like swarm eusocial insects. But imagine it's like you have an AI that is. Its intelligence works more like an ecosystem, and it's more like a plant-like AI, and so it's like you have this type of AI that it has enormous amounts of RAM because it has these tree roots that just stretch everywhere, and you can ask it a question and it could solve problems that involve the amount of data that no human could even fathom solving with our traditional computing methods. But maybe it's very slow and it works on this more natural time scale where you ask it a very difficult question and it takes a week to get back to you, and like what would that relationship be like? And the reason I get this is that that's sort of like a post like AI apocalypse scenario. It's where it's like when you ask about, that like AI taking over, is that like a forever question? Is that like, we get locked into a certain state where for the rest of time humanity can never reach its full potential? Or do we go through something like that and then, humans manage to still adapt to whatever that situation is, and then we end up with maybe not a utopia, but at least a pretty good world for humans like thousands of years down the line? Like, are you talking about like all humans end up being enslaved forever or dying, or like how do you define this type of scenario by which AI takes over and I don't know where I'm going with this.
It's a great question. I've never been asked that question before on a panel, so that's awesome.
All right. we have time for a couple more questions? We've got some folks, yeah, Jamie?
Also, feel free to stand up and stretch too if you need to. We won't, I won't be offended anyway. I might stretch just.
This question is specifically for Kirsten, so I'm just going to go into a little bit more nuts and bolts about using AI, and maybe also touches on something that I think maybe came up in your talk yesterday about the idea of, what is copying, looking. We give assignments here, I have anyway, where I ask the students to go find reference of a particular game that they want their game to look like, and then I hold them to the standard of, did you achieve that level of excellence, that look? Because that's what that company wants. That company says, hey kid, I'm gonna hire you if you do work that looks like my work, because I need you to do more work that looks like my work. And so we give them that assignment. Go look at that work and produce work that looks like it. And in my opinion, it's exactly what AI is doing. It's not copying anything, it's looking at everything and then going, all right, I'm gonna make some stuff that looks like that. So that's happening. And then there's this other element of what we've been talking about the past couple of days of not doing that and training it on your own work, which you do a lot of. And so I'm just kind of curious about an idea and your take and maybe your approach to how do you advance your look, your work, your style, if you're always feeding it your own work and your style. And for you, where does the fresh stuff come in? Like, where are you going next?
All right, so the first point you made kind of comes to the crux of like the humanist lens versus the functionalist lens, because the idea of, oh, AI just works the way a human gets inspired. There are people who say that, and that's more of a functionalist thing to say, is that, somehow in some platonic reality they're both the same thing. Whereas the humanists, and a lot of artists who will make this argument, is that no, it's not the same thing because humans are not machines. And so even though conceptually somehow it is the same, it's not the same because a conscious brain isn't doing it. And so I can't really, I can give you those two answers and let you choose which one you prefer based on the lens you want to look at it with. And then to answer your question about, how do you keep injecting new novelty into that process, I still get, my core inspiration still comes from nature. And I go out and take a walk, and next thing you know, I'm on my knees, taking a picture of this piece of lichen on this rock over here, because that's the ultimate source of novelty. And all the stuff we do, both as human artists and whatever AI does, it's always a derivative of that ultimate source. And so, I still predominantly, especially in my professional work is almost entirely drawing lately. It's quick sketch, rapid sketch kind of stuff where, I'm still drawing on, I'm using that AI stuff. It's sort of like a visual library where I'll look at it. It's kind of fertilizer for my own internalized thoughts. But then when I sit down and work on the paper, I'm not looking at that stuff as reference directly. It's just more like something to kind of just prime, like a bunch of form language, just kind of prime my mind. So what I'm saying is that there's a lot coming into the system that's not. I think what you're referring to is a bit like the concept of data incest, or this idea that of training something based on what it's already output, and this idea that if you keep doing that, somehow things devolve. But you're always injecting new stuff into the system, and I'll use my own photographs to train with as well, so it's not just training on its own outputs. But it's a great question, for sure. So, yeah.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, it was, but if you had any thoughts. All right, we have time for one more quick question. All right, well, let's give our guests a big round of applause.